All right, last game of the first round. It's funny because before the final bracket came out, we were sitting there on my show and we were going through, some of the scenarios, like what if this team wins the Big 12? What if this team wins, all this different stuff. No matter what happened, the 8-9 matchup stayed the same. It was destined to be Ohio State hosting Tennessee, and that's what we ended up with. And it'll be the primetime game Saturday night at Ohio Stadium. The Buckeyes are a 7-point favorite. So, Bryan, we'll start with you on this one with how the Buckeyes got to this position.
It's interesting, guys. I think of all the issues of the first round matchups, I think the team that got screwed the most by the seeding is Tennessee, because they should not have had to play Ohio State in the first round. Guys, this is an Ohio State team that when they have been on their game this year has been a really impressive team. Started the season off with a 52-6 win over Akron, then beat Western Michigan 56-0. That's a Western Michigan team that at times has been able to score a little bit this year, completely shut them down. Beat Marshall 49-14 in a game that was competitive early. Marshall played with them a little bit early, and then Ohio State really pulled it out in the second half. That's a Marshall team that went 10-3, and Ohio State beat them by 35. They went on the road, and again, the next two games were very similar. Didn't start off great against Michigan State. Didn't start off great against Iowa. I think it was 7-0 at halftime against Iowa, and then poured it on in the second half and really put those teams away. And then they go out and play Oregon, and it was one of those weird games where if you talk to an Ohio State fan, they're going to talk about how they were this close to doing this, but if you talk to an Oregon fan, they're going to be like, A, your first score shouldn't have counted because the guy literally never caught it. The receiver tight end never had possession of the throw. They'll have all these excuses, but at the end of the day, the reality is Ohio State lost a hard-fought game, and then they were just not right, really, the next couple games offensively. I think they struggled big time against Nebraska. Their offense really struggled against Penn State. I thought when they put the game away late with that late drive that was going to be the thing that Ohio State finally found their answer. And they, just Penn State can't score late. Ohio State just got to stop them from getting 2 first downs, and you get the ball, and Ohio State just ran it right down their throat. I thought, okay, now Ohio State's going to get back to playing Ohio State football, right? Beat Purdue 45-0, had an ugly 31-7 win over Northwestern, and then smacked Indiana. But you kind of started to see some issues in that game, fellas, because the defense is really what carried that team all season. I mean, the most points they gave up in a game was 32 to Oregon. After that, the next most points they gave up was 17 to Nebraska. I mean, they were a dominant defense. They shut down Indiana's offense. Indiana fans can talk all they want about special teams is why we lost that game. No, you lost that game because you had 151 yards of offense and averaged 2.56 yards per play. I don't care if you don't have both of those special teams mistakes. Okay, you only lose 24-15 or 27-15. You're still losing that football game.
Scoring.
Yeah. Exactly. And the only reason they got their last score is because that's when Ohio State kind of was like, okay, we've got a big lead. Right. And they went and punched one in late. That game was, it was a 23-point win for Ohio State, guys. And it really wasn't that close of a game. It really wasn't that close of a game. And it could have been a whole lot worse. 31-7 when Ohio State scored, or Indiana scored with 1:53 left to make it 31-15. And then Ohio State went right down the field and scored a touchdown in a minute. So that was really the thing, is Ohio State's offense, even in that game, they didn't score 38 points because of their offense. They scored 38 points because of their defense and special teams. So looking at from the Ohio State standpoint, I do think there was something to that. Then, of course, they go out in that game against Michigan and just did what they always do. They just don't show up against that football team. And I don't understand it. I don't know why Michigan has their number, because Michigan is just not a good football team. They're really not. They're not a good football team, and they especially weren't a very good football team coming down the stretch.
Solid defensive team, but that offense
right.
is just
it's not good. It's not good. And you can't score more than 10 points against them. That's really the issue going into the season, this postseason for Ohio State, is what version of their offense is going to show up. Now, if you look at this Buckeye team, I think they were pretty banged up late in the year. Seth McLaughlin was out. Their left tackle's been out for a while. They're another team that I think in some ways not playing in the Big Ten title game could end up being the best thing to happen to this Ohio State football team, because they get that extra little bit of rest. That's one less game of beating. Now, they would have had the same amount of time off if they would have beat Oregon, but if they'd have lost to Oregon, you not only have to play that extra game, you got to then play again in 2 weeks. They needed to get healthy. They needed to regroup. It's all going to come down to, as we dive into this, and Trevor's going to talk a little bit about how Tennessee got here, but when we dive into the matchup part, guys, it's going to be about what version of Ohio State are we going to get. Tennessee has kind of been who they've been most of the year. Ohio State, you really don't know what version you're going to get from week to week.
Yeah, and I don't know how much that break is going to help out Ohio State. I don't know about their left tackle, but Seth McLaughlin's out for the year. He tore his Achilles. So it's going to be interesting to see how they
talk about Notre Dame. They've got now extra time to figure out how to get that unit together is what I'm referring to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Tennessee, it's been a weird season for them, if I'm just being 100% honest. Like it was a lot of this, a lot of ups and downs. They started out the season on an offensive explosion. In their first 3 games, they scored 69. Now, mind you, these opponents are not good, but scoring they're not. But you go through and you look at what they did: 69 points against Chattanooga, 51 against NC State, 71 points against Kent State. Now, those are not good football teams, but putting up over 50 points in 3 straight games is noteworthy, right? But then once they got into SEC play, not only did that dip below 50, they didn't score over 30 points again until Mississippi State, when they scored 33. Now, along that road, they were upset. They lost to Arkansas on October 5th, 19-14. That was an ugly game. It was at Arkansas, which is, I guess, why people are labeling Arkansas a tough place to play now, I suppose, because Tennessee lost there. I'm not buying into it. But then 2 weeks later, after they lost to Arkansas, they beat Alabama at home 24-17 in a game where we were kind of talking about whoever wins, whoever loses, potentially might start losing the locker room a little bit. Like it's one of those games where it's like, okay, like what happens to Alabama if they lose that game? Well, we kind of went on to see what happened, because I think that was a week after. Was that a week after Alabama lost to Vanderbilt?
2
weeks. 2 weeks. Because Alabama did drop back to back. You're right. So, so you go and you start looking at what happened with those games. And then Tennessee had another big matchup against Georgia in the middle of November. They lost that one 31-17. Now, they did enough in the regular season, and they had enough losses above them to put them in a position where, yes, they didn't play in the SEC championship game, but they solidified themselves enough in the rankings that going into championship week, they were a lock essentially to get into the first round of the college football playoffs. A lot of people talk about Nico and how good he was. Towards the end of the season, he had 15 touchdown passes, and I think 14 of them came against the Chattanoogas of the world, NC State, Kent State, Mississippi State. So, against big top level teams, he didn't really perform that well. He just played well enough to not lose the game, but he's not going out and actively winning football games for Tennessee, right? So something that's going to be factored into their matchup against Ohio State. He relied on, a really, really good defense and a really good run game with Dylan Sampson to get them to this point. So all encompassing, that's where Tennessee's at.
Can I say something about Tennessee real quick, Trev? The way they started the season and the way they ended the season is makes you say, who are they? Because if you look at how they started the season, their offense first 3 weeks, people are talking about Nico being a Heisman candidate, which is, again, why it's so stupid to make those type of conversations in September. I know we have articles to sell and shows that we need to get people to click on and watch and all that. I understand that, but it's freaking September against not very good teams. But I felt like they were a very mediocre offense for a long time. But about the second quarter of that UTEP game, they started to dominate. I was like, well, it's freaking UTEP. They're terrible. And then they came out early against Vanderbilt and looked exactly like the same team they had been kind of all year. And then all of a sudden the light went on and they rolled Vanderbilt in a way that nobody else had rolled Vanderbilt for the next 2.5 quarters. And that's the thing is, if they can find a way to tap into that more often, then that makes them a little bit dangerous. But that's what happens when you're young at quarterback. You're going to have some of that, right? You're going to have some of that. And I tell you what, I give Josh Heupel a lot of credit. This is the second time in his career I think he has a team ahead of schedule as far as how good they are. He had them ahead of schedule 2 years ago. They were better than they should have been 2 years ago, and I think he has them ahead of schedule this year. I think he's done a really quietly, really good job at Tennessee. He really has. And they battled some injuries too this year. James Pierce hasn't been healthy a chunk of the season. He's played, but hasn't been 100%. I think Tennessee earned their playoff berth. I do. I think Tennessee should have been playing on the road. But I think that you could have maybe had some conversations after the Georgia loss about where they belong. But I think they showed me something, the way that they bounced back, especially the way they beat Vanderbilt, who's not a great football team by any stretch, but Vanderbilt was at least competitive against a lot of people, and they smoked them. I mean, it was the 17. They were down 17-0 in that game, and just still rolled. So Tennessee showed me a little bit something, and these are two teams that ended the season on very different notes. Very different notes. And I don't know that Vanderbilt and Michigan are super different as football teams. And
I agree, because they're both really good defensive teams. And I think if you just think of Tennessee, probably because of Heupel, you think more offense. And, like you said, they started off with this supersonic offense, but then they got, into the heart of SEC play, and that offense kind of disappeared before it reemerged, like you talked about at the end of the season. And that's why, like when I look at this matchup, to me, it is just a very even matchup. It deserves to be the 8-9 game. Like you said, like Tennessee looked like they were probably going to be out of the playoff after they got bounced by Georgia, but then that's about the time all these other upsets started happening, and it opened the door for them.
Yeah,
again.
we choked. So Alabama was like, "Hold my beer." Yeah, we're gonna show how really how to choke. You know what I mean?
Right. That's exactly. So, are there any specific matchups that you guys are looking at when you look at this game?
Well, for me, there's a couple, right? And there's two matchups of the Ohio State offense against the Tennessee defense that I think are polar opposites that are gonna who performs well in this game. And here's where it is. If this was an inside run period, right? We're football coaches, right? So if this is an inside run period, Tennessee's going to dominate. Inside run, for those of you who maybe didn't play football, it's a period where literally it's just your linemen and your tight end and your running backs and the front seven, and you're just working on run game, right? If this was an inside run period, Tennessee will dominate Ohio State. Simmons has been down all year. McLaughlin, who just won the Remington Trophy, he's out. Donovan Jackson's still there. Carson Hinsman's in starting center now. It's an okay line at this point in time, and Tennessee's defensive line is really, really good most of the time. And now that James Pierce has 3 weeks to recover and get healthy, is he going to look like the top 5 overall draft pick version of him, which he's looked like that at times, but he's clearly been slowed down at times this season. Still productive. You know what I mean? For when you look at his numbers, he's still very productive for a guy who hasn't been healthy for a big chunk of the year. If this was a 7-on-7 game, Ohio State's offense dominates because there's a big mismatch at receiver, in my opinion. Tennessee secondary is okay, but as I've been saying all year, guys, there's a lot of average secondaries in the SEC this year. And Ohio State has the skill talent to take advantage of that. And that's where it comes down to, here's the great unknown. And here's where I thought Ohio State being a preseason number 1 or 2 team at the beginning of the year was going to be their detriment is Will Howard. That's what it boils down to for me. Ohio State's offense. Tennessee has shown they can win by just asking their young quarterback to be a game manager. When Will Howard can't be a game manager because this offense requires the quarterback to be dominant. And when he's not, and I don't think he's as good of a quarterback, I think when I look at Will Howard, I see a lot of hollow numbers. And I had a debate with a good buddy of mine the other day, and he was talking about LSU and how good Garrett Nussmeier was. And he was talking about his yards. And I said, those are a lot of hollow numbers because when you throw the ball 50 times, you better have over 300 yards. And when I look at Will Howard, I see a guy that's put up numbers, 27 touchdowns, 9.1 yards per attempt, 2,800 yards passing and all that type of stuff. But I see a guy that put up a lot of hollow numbers. And when he's played good defenses, he's struggled. Against Penn State and Ohio and Michigan in those 2 games, and you could even include Indiana in that game. In those games, he has had 5 touchdowns and 4 picks against those 3 teams.
Right,
best teams he's played all year, and he's a guy that I don't really trust him in this moment. So if you're a typical Ohio State team, you're going to need your run game to carry the day against this kind of team. But I don't think they can do that, guys. They haven't shown the willingness to be a team that builds around their running backs the way they need to. And B, I don't think they can if they wanted to because of the injuries they have up front. I don't know that Ohio State is capable of really going out and just running the ball on a good team. They went for $115 and sub-4 per carry against Indiana. They went for 77 yards and sub-3 yards a carry against Michigan. Are they capable of
When they
running the
should have
ball
just
on a
been
good
throwing the
team.
ball against Michigan.
I mean, I still don't understand that. It's like they were trying. It's like I think Ryan, Trev, was it you that said it or Vince that said it? It was all about Ryan Day's ego. He wanted to prove that they could just run on Michigan, and they couldn't. If they would have thrown on Michigan the way that Indiana did early in that game, they would have won that game. Even if it was ugly, they'd have won that game. But I don't know. Can you protect Will Howard against that front seven? If you can protect Will Howard against that front seven, then Ohio State has a shot to move the football and to score enough points to win. The reason that so that's the matchup when you look at the Ohio State offense against Tennessee defense. That's really the key. Can you protect Will Howard? Because if you can, he doesn't have to be great because they have an advantage on the perimeter. And it's up to Chip Kelly and Ryan Day to design a way to get their stud receivers the football more and in space. The 3 weeks off, to me, if I'm Tennessee, I'm a little bit nervous about that because it's going to allow them to kind of scheme up some ways to get those guys the football. But at the end of the day, if they can't protect Will Howard against that vaunted pass rush, it may not matter. And that on that side of the ball, that's the intriguing matchup of that from the Ohio State offense with the Tennessee defense.
Yeah, to me, this game comes down to a couple things. One, I'm still going to touch on it. It's Ryan Day's ego, and he has done things this season that puts me in a spot where I can't trust him. You know, like you go through and you look, and I mean, if you thought the noise was loud going into Michigan and they can't run on Michigan and they're not as physical as Michigan, it has a better defense and a better front seven and better rushing numbers against teams than Michigan, Tennessee. Mm-hmm. So if Ryan Day goes into this game and he's just like, see, we are physical, we are aggressive, you're going to lose, dude. You're going to lose big. Trust in the guys that you have on the perimeter to go out and make plays. Now, for Ohio State on offense, I agree with everything that you guys said about Will Howard. The detriment's going to be, to me, because of the byproduct of Will Howard not playing well in big moments is because his running backs haven't played well in big moments. Mm-hmm. You went out and threw a bag at this SEC running back, and you did that to average 2.9 yards a carry against Purdue, 3.8 against Michigan, 2.1 against Oregon, and 2.9 against Nebraska, right? For all these people talking about, man, Quinshon Judkins this and Judkins that, like that's going to be a big deciding factor in this game because that's going to put Will Howard in a spot where he has to put the team on his back. And I'm with you guys. I don't think that he has it. To me, in big games, he's 0 for 3. I don't care what his final stat line said against Oregon, right? He, in the Oregon game, boneheaded slide. I'm sorry. Like you have to have more awareness than that. That's a true freshman, true sophomore type of mistake. And you're a transfer. You have senior year eligibility. You've played in big moments before. That's ultimately, it's not the only thing that cost them the game against Oregon, but that was the nail in the coffin. You go and you look, Penn State's only touchdown of the day, pick 6. Now, the rest of your team carried you enough to go on and win. And that was still
fumbled a ball into the end zone that kept them from blowing that game out because they were on the verge of blowing Penn State out if he doesn't fumble that ball in the end zone.
Right. And then you go and you look at what he did against Michigan, 57% completion percentage, 1 touchdown pass, 2 interceptions against Michigan. And their best player in the secondary, arguably best player on the team, Will Johnson, didn't even play. Mm-hmm. So you have this streak of big games where Will Howard has played in, and he's been meh. In the moments where they needed him, in the moments where they needed him to go and be the quarterback like they thought he was going to be, he hasn't. Now, I think that's a big issue. So to me, this game comes down to, is Will Howard going to finally make a moment in a big game? Can Quinshon Judkins finally, can Quinshon Judkins finally be the running back that they paid him to be?
Play against a team with a pulse.
Right. And can Ryan Day finally be the coach that people think that he's going to be or want him to be, whatever? And that's a lot of things going against Ohio State, opposed to you look at Tennessee, it's like, can Nico just be a game manager? And it's like, that's my thing.
Sean, you got something you want to add to that? Because I have some thoughts on the other side of the ball as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say I don't know who I have less confidence in, Will Howard or Ryan Day in this situation.
Which is that's a scary thing for the Buckeyes, though, right, Sean? I mean, your quarterback and your freaking head coach.
Exactly, because Ryan Day, for all the things that we might say about him, the only home losses that he have been to Oregon and to Michigan. He's got a pretty good track record.
Right.
But he's also not played another team like this, like a Tennessee, where are other than Penn State, who else has he played in those kind of situations at home? And now there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of, all the lingering stuff that comes out of you just lost your last game, home game to Michigan. That's why you're in this situation to begin with. Maybe there's a chance they'd still be playing a home game, but there's a greater chance that they'd be playing that home game, either against Clemson or, Boise State or SMU or, one of those kind of teams. They're in this situation because they completely choked against Michigan. So I just, like, as even as this matchup is, I have very little confidence in both Ohio State's quarterback and their head coach.
Then you look at Tennessee, guys, and you look at the other side of the ball, and Tennessee is going to have equally tough time against because here's why is Ohio State where they are. We just got done saying their head coach is very mid in a lot of ways. Their quarterback can't win big games. Their offensive line's a hot mess. Their stud running back is, and I use air quotes on stud running back. He's one of the biggest front runners in college football, in my opinion. And I'll tell you what, I'm probably still picking Ohio State to win. Why? Because on the other side of the ball, they're as good as there is in the country. In my opinion, they are. They're as good as there is in the country. And I don't know that Tennessee has, there's one bit of kryptonite for Ohio State. If you have burners on the outside, you can hurt them. We saw that with Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson. I don't know that Dante Thornton is enough. Now, Dante Thornton's a big play guy. He's at over 25 yards a catch, but he's a long strider type of player. Is he enough in the pass game to take advantage of Ohio State? Is he enough? Because you're going to have a tough time running the ball on Ohio. Well, in theory, you should have a tough time running the ball on Ohio State. This is a team that's really has a great defense. Their run defense has been pretty solid all season. For the Buckeyes, they have one of the top pass defenses in college football. All those things are great. But here's the thing that we're going to find out in this game, fellas. And here's where I could completely get this prediction wrong. My concern with Ohio State is, and some of you Buckeye fans and Big Ten fans are not going to like this, I don't think the Big Ten's very good this year, guys. I don't. And I think the Big Ten has a lot of bad offenses. And I think that plays a little bit of a role in why Ohio State is as good as they are defensively. And I've said all year, boy, that run defense is really, really good. And then I watched Michigan run on them with no threat of throwing the football. None. And still ran for 172 yards on them. And when Ohio State needed to put that game away late, or not put the game away, but when Ohio State needed to make a stop to get the ball back, their defense couldn't stop Michigan from running the football on them. And so I wonder, how good is Ohio State really? But I can only go with what I know. And what I know right now is Ohio State has been on this stage before. They have a big-time defense. They're going to be at home. And I don't know that I trust that Tennessee has the speed needed to beat them enough in the pass game to win this football game. And so that's the part of the matchup that's going to be key. If Tennessee's going to win this game, I think their defense has to force Ohio State into big mistakes. That's going to be the key. You're going to have to get the ball from Will Howard. You're going to have to force him into some sort of turnover, some sort of big mistake that gives you short fields, because I don't know that Tennessee can consistently move the ball up and down the field against these type of teams. I don't.
See, and that's the thing, like Penn State made him make a couple mistakes, but they just didn't have the horses offensively to capitalize when it was all said and done.
Right. And that's the issue with the Big Ten. And Big Ten fans, this is the best conference, and all. I don't agree with that this year. I don't know that there is an elite conference this year. I don't know that any conference is great this year. But one thing that I don't think is debatable is that the Big Ten is just not good offensively this year. The best offense in the Big Ten is what? Ohio is outside of Oregon is what? Ohio State. Yeah. Well, Oregon went for over 300 yards against, or 30 points, and I think almost 500 yards against Ohio State. There's only so Indiana has a high scoring offense, but they didn't play anybody. There's two good offenses in the Big Ten outside of Ohio State. And they shut one of them down and the other one moved on them. So which one is it? Are you the team that shut down Indiana, or are you the team that shut down, or that kind of got rolled a little bit by Oregon? That's the kind of what we're going to find out this week. I tend to lean towards them being the team that they look like against Indiana, and not the team that they were against Oregon defensively. I think that was a bit of an anomaly with their secondary. I do. I think that just the way that they got ripped up by Tez Johnson, and I think Evan Stewart, that was a money game for Evan Stewart. If I'm being honest with you, that was the game where he's going to show the NFL what he's all about. And I thought Denzel Burke played a bad game. Guys, it happens. It's like what we talk about with Notre Dame against USC. I think Ohio State just played a bad game defensively. I think they're better than what they showed against Oregon. And I think the Indiana game was the thing that kind of showed me that. But they're going to have to slow down Dylan Sampson to do that. If they can shut down the Tennessee run game and make Nico beat them, to your point, Trev, Nico has not been asked to be a playmaker this year in SEC play. It's manage the game, but to beat a team like Ohio State, to beat a team like Georgia, at some point in time, your quarterback is going to have to make some plays. And against Alabama, their defense played so well, he didn't have to. But against Georgia, he needed to. Against Arkansas, he needed to, and he couldn't do it. And that's why they lost those 2 football games. I think Ohio State is good enough defensively to put them in some situations where we're going to say, Nico's going to have to beat us. And if he can make some big plays throwing the ball and with his legs, then I think that they can win this football game. If he can't, then I think Ohio State wins this football game. That's really what it comes down to, is make Nico beat you. And I don't know if he can. But it could also, is this the coming out party for a kid like Nico? That's what we're going to find out.
All right, let's pick it then. Who's going first? Trevor?
Yeah. So for me, I think there's just too much stacked up against Ohio State. I do. There's questions around quarterback play, questions around the head coach, questions around the offensive line. There's questions around the identity of the team. How good is this team? Look, I don't know if I'm on the train anymore either of like, well, Ohio State doesn't have a big game problem. They have a Michigan problem. It's like, well, then if that's the case, why does Ryan Day not have a national championship yet with all the teams that he's had? You know what I'm saying? Look, I would hear that out if they had a Michigan problem and every year in the first round of the playoffs or every year in the national championship, they played Michigan and just can't beat that team. But let's call a spade here. You can't be on the side of, well, we think Penn State's overrated and IU's not as good if you're an Ohio State fan, and then turn it around and be like, oh, Ryan Day's not good in big games. Well, he beat Penn State and IU. So, where are we at? You know what I mean? So when I look at this game, yes, maybe they had a Michigan problem when they had Harbaugh and they had J.J. McCarthy and Blake Corum and all those guys, a really good defense. Look, I think it's too easy of a cop-out to say, just stop Dylan Sampson and you win. Nobody's stopped Dylan Sampson this year. Arkansas did a good job. They won.
Georgia did in the second half, which is why it went from 17-17 tie to 31-17 loss.
Right. But Ohio State's defense couldn't stop Khalil Mullings. He was better than Khalil Mullings, Dylan Sampson.
I get that, Trev, but at some point in time, you have to say, over the course of the season, were they very good at stopping the run over the course of the season? Yes or no? Yes, they were. They were, right? So it's like saying, well, because Notre Dame's pass defense sucked against USC, that means they sucked, even though the rest of the season showed a different story. I mean, and again, I brought up the end of the Michigan game. That was not a good look for Ohio State's defense. I think part of it is they were worn down because they've been carrying this dang team for so long.
Sure.
And that's where I think the 3 weeks off is going to be important, because not a lot of other teams ran the ball on them like that. Oregon had a couple nice runs, but they only went for $155. They shut down Penn State's run game. They shut down Nebraska's run game. They completely dominated Indiana's run game. They shut down Marshall's run game, who has a good run game, has a team that can run the football this season. If you look at it, but that's the question, though, Trevor, right? Is it an anomaly, right? Was it an anomaly game, or is this who Ohio State actually is when they play a good rushing team? I mean, that's the question that we don't know, but it's like, if you're going to say that their rush defense is not very good because Khalil Mullings ran on them, then we have to say that Notre Dame's pass defense isn't actually good because of how Jaden Maeva ran through on them.
Sure. I mean, but I also don't think that Michigan's the only team that had success on the ground against them. I guess you can say, well, only Oregon went for $155 and 2 touchdowns on the ground, but they went for 155 yards. And
it's not a great performance. I mean, if you average 155 yards a game rushing the football, you would rank where? Let's see. You would, in the national, you'd rank 76th in the nation in rushing if you averaged 155 yards a game, right? I mean, so that's not a great. And also, when you look at Oregon, what is Oregon's season average rushing the football this year? Their season average is 171. They held them 16 yards below their season average. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I just think if you're going to Oregon at home hold them to 155 yards, that's a solid rushing game performance. That's not like getting gashed. You know what I mean? Like that's
sure.
all I'm saying. Right.
And Oregon doesn't have Dylan Sampson.
No, I get that. Jordan James is no bum. Yeah,
I agree, but But my point is, Bryan, is
Right.
I don't like this mentality. We'll just stop Dylan Sampson.
Sure.
Okay.
It's lazy.
Like we'll just stop Jeremiah Smith. Okay. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Well,
like, it's not, you can't look at it both ways like that.
What it is, you have to make Nico beat you. So, I mean, you can think that my take is lazy, but I don't think it. I think that, look, you have to be able to slow down. You can't let Dylan Sampson beat you. You have to make Nico beat you. Right. I mean, that's simple as that. And that's really what it comes down to. Now, the question is, can they? Because, like, we talk about Notre Dame. Yeah, every team that played Notre Dame the last half of the season said stop their run game and make Riley Leonard beat you with the pass game. Well, okay. Nobody could do it.
So that's why for my prediction, I'm saying I don't think that they can.
I understand that. But what I'm saying is, like, I mean, we're having a discussion here about it, right? Is I don't think just saying because they didn't do well in one game that their rush defense sucks. That's what I'm saying. Because I felt like you were pushing back on my comment saying you've got to stop the run game and make Nico beat you.
No, I wasn't pushing back on I was saying for my prediction specifically, I don't think Ohio State's going to be able to stop Dylan Sampson. I think it's a cop-out answer to just say, well, just stop Dylan Sampson and Tennessee can't do it.
Okay, but that's what I'm saying. So you're saying I made a cop-out answer because that's what I said that Ohio State has to do.
No, I'm saying there's people in the chat that have just been saying, you stop Dylan Sampson, Tennessee doesn't do anything. I think it's a taller order to ask of a team to just say, oh, we'll just stop their best player.
Sure.
I mean, duh. Well, how do you beat Oregon? Well, you just stop Tez Johnson and Dylan Gabriel. Good luck. But you know what I'm saying? Like, to your point that you brought up, well, to beat Notre Dame, you just stop Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Riley Leonard. Right. No team has this.
Right.
So, like, my point is, for my prediction, I don't think Ohio State's going to be able to stop Dylan Sampson. I don't. Like, I think they have way too many issues on offense and with their identities, and I don't know how good their defense is going to play. Their rush defense has been the most consistent. But I think giving up 155 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns against Oregon, albeit it was at Autzen Stadium, I don't think then that means they stop Dylan Sampson. Like, I just don't. So I have Ohio State losing this one, 23-17. I said it at the start of the playoff that I think that this could be the one upset of the round 1 games. So that's where I'm at.
Well, I'll just go ahead and go with my lazy cop out and say that I think that they do have a shot to shut down the run game. Because again,
it's funny how salty it got in here, considering Salty has made no comments.
I know, where is Salty? What's he doing? Is he like shopping? Is he shopping with his wife today?
Got very crisp here at the end of the show. D-Troll Hunter said, it's like I've thought about chiming in a couple times, but you guys are ready to cut each other's heads off. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Make your prediction. Mine's at the end.
Chime in away.
I have nothing else at this point.
I think when I watch Ohio State's run defense this year, I think it has been a solid run defense all season. And I think one thing that has helped them with their run defense is the fact that they do jump on people. My issue comes down to if Tennessee can be balanced in this game, they have no shot at stopping Dylan Sampson. None. Because you have to commit resources. And that's what I'm saying is early in the game, you have to say we're stopping Dylan Sampson. That has to be your game plan if you're Ohio State. Can you do that? I don't know. Georgia tried to do that early and it didn't work. And I think he was like 80 yards at halftime. And then the second half of the game, they found answers and they were able to stop him. And I think it was 17-17 halftime game becomes a 31-17 Georgia win. That's really what it comes down to, because I do think Ohio State is good enough with a guy like Caleb Downs in the third level that they can start getting him into the box. You look at what they did to Indiana, for example, and completely made them one-dimensional. And then a lot of stuff they were trying to do to run stunts and run blitzes were getting to the quarterback, and then he didn't have time. I think this is a better offensive line than what Indiana has. And that's going to be the key, is Tennessee has a better offensive line than what Indiana has. And can you do that for 4 quarters? And that's going to be the challenge for Ohio State. And if they can do that and make Nico beat you, then I think it's going to be a much more competitive game. So I had a hard time with this one because I do think that they can slow Dylan Sampson down enough, but then it comes down to what can you do offensively? And at the end of the day, I think this is going to be a game where Tennessee's going to try to run the ball, and they're going to have success at times. At other times, they're not. Tennessee's a team that has really struggled to score points this season. If you look at the stretch after Kent State, they won 71-0. They scored 25, 14, 23, 24, 28, 33 against a crap Mississippi State team, 17 against Georgia, the 56 against UTEP, and then 36 against Vanderbilt. The question then becomes back to what I said early, Trev, after you talked about how Tennessee got here. Is that a sign of things to come for them in the postseason, or was that just sort of a Vanderbilt wearing down at the end of the year? That's what we don't know, right? And that's how a lot of these teams going into the playoff, end of the season, not great. And that's what's going to be in. Texas didn't end the season very well. Clemson didn't end the season very well. Yeah, they beat SMU, but they got beat by South Carolina a week before. Notre Dame won all their games, but they're probably their worst game the last 2 months was the last game of the regular season. You know, Penn State ended the season with a loss. SMU ended the season with a loss. You know what I mean? Like Indiana beat Purdue, but then they played pretty poorly in the 2 games before that. There's not a lot of teams like in the first round that are just sky high, killing everybody, playing their best football coming in the postseason. Except not that Tennessee did it for a period of time, but that last 2.5 quarters against Vanderbilt, they started to look like the team they were in September. And that's the thing is if we see that team in this game, then I think Tennessee wins because here's the key, Trev, in this game. If Tennessee can have success scoring early and they make Ohio State say you have to go on the attack, you have to score with us, this is going to be a 31-27 game, I get a little bit nervous if I'm a Buckeye fan. Because now it becomes a Will Howard has to make plays and you have to protect Will Howard. And that's what it kind of comes down to. And so I've been back and forth about this all week. I think what it's going to be for me is I don't trust either quarterback, but at least Will Howard has shown me that he has been able to play on a stage similar to this and have some good moments. Now, not at Ohio State per se, but I keep thinking back to the Big 12 title game a couple years ago when they beat TCU. And Will Howard played really good football down the stretch of that game. I think he's going to be able to make enough plays in this game to get them to 21. And I think that gets it done. Because I have a lot more faith in the Ohio State defense than I think maybe some other people on this show do. I don't want to point any fingers at who I'm talking about. I'm just kidding.
I stand by my
I'm
opinion.
not going to crush you for it because we had a similar conversation when we talked about SMU Clemson last week. So you looked pretty good on that one. I just look at what they've done over the course of the year, and even in that Michigan game, they gave up 13 points, right? I think this is going to be a low-scoring game, and if it's a low-scoring game, Ohio State wins. If this becomes a game, Trevor, where Tennessee gets past 20 and not on like final drive, punch one in when you're down 14 and get it. But if this is a game where you're getting into the third quarter and Tennessee gets over 20, then I think Tennessee wins this game. My prediction is 21-17 Ohio State. But if Tennessee starts moving the ball early, that's when Ohio State's screwed because in my prediction, you don't need Will Howard to play well for 4 quarters. You need him to make a couple plays. And when you look at the matchup of their receivers against Tennessee secondary, I think Emeka, I think Jeremiah Smith, they're going to have a couple big plays in the pass game that set up scores that overcome the fact that they're not going to be able to run the ball on Tennessee and they're not going to protect Will Howard for 4 quarters. I just don't think Tennessee can score more than 20 points only running the football on Ohio State. Because I think Dylan Sampson may get to 105, 110, 120, but it's going to be like 4.1 per carry, 3.9 per carry, and you're going to need Nico to go make a play. The thing that Will Howard has that Nico doesn't, Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Cardinal Tate, Brandon Ennis, and Travion Henderson out of the backfield. That, to me, is the difference. That's the one group that I think can go out there and handle this game. That's where I'm at. So I'm going 21-17 Buckeyes.
So you basically made the point that I would have boiled it all down to. You know, we can talk about the 2 quarterbacks, and both of these teams have elite defenses, and that's, you know, that to me is what makes it so hard to try to sort out who's going to come out on top in this, is because the defenses are very similar, you know, like what, just in terms of the stinginess of play and everything else. I do want to say, I do think it's ironic that Ohio State and Michigan, you know, with this whole, we don't want to play night games in November. And now they get a playoff home game on December 21st at 8:00 at night. I do think that's pretty hilarious, honestly. But at the end of the day, I think this all comes down to, you know, like Sampson will get some yards. I do think Ohio State will at least be able to limit him. And I just feel like Tennessee is going to be the more one-dimensional team between the two offenses because of what you finished with there, Bryan, because of the playmaking ability of Ohio State's wide receivers. Because Will Howard, whatever deficiencies he has, he's just got more talent around him offensively. And that goes, with the two running backs as well, because, I know that Sampson obviously, is like much more the highlight guy and everything else, but Judkins and Henderson are a nice little tandem as well, so you don't have to rely on just one of them. And then with all the receiver talent that they've got, if Ryan Day actually rolls out a game plan and intends to use those skill guys, I think that's ultimately going to be the difference at the end of the day. And I've only got a 3-point difference in my prediction. I've got 24-17 Ohio State.
So 24-17. Trev, what was your final? Tennessee?
23-17.
So we all see this as a close, low-scoring game, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Here I'm going to say this about this prediction. If Ohio State wins this game and goes on any kind of run, they're going to have to make Travion Henderson a bigger part of their offense. I think that's the secret sauce for Ohio State. They have tried to ride Quinshon Judkins all season, and he is not that guy. It's like they think he's Dylan Sampson, Trevor. That's who Ohio State thinks he is. And he's not. He never had. He's a front runner. He piles up yards against bad teams. That's what he is. And that's what he's always been. Travion Henderson, to me, he's been banged up a lot of his career. He was so great as a freshman. He hasn't been healthy the last couple of years. I feel like getting him going is really the thing that they're going to have to do in this game. It really is. And he started to kind of get there going into the Michigan game. He had a big run against Indiana. He had some big runs against Northwestern. He had 6 for 85 against Northwestern. They're going to have to say him running and catching is the secret sauce for Ohio State to win this game and any future games. That's the thing, because I've seen Quinshon Judkins punk out and kind of curl up on short yardage situations. I still can't get that 4th and 1 against Oregon out of my head where he saw a linebacker in the hole and he goes like this and protects himself and takes the hit short of the sticks. Then I watched 205-pound Jeremiah Love in a similar situation run over a USC linebacker in a similar situation. Travion's going to be the key for them, in my opinion. Absolutely is going to be the key for them. And if they continue to use the backs the way they have all season, that could get them in trouble. But I just have a feeling that with 3 weeks rest, we're going to see a Travion Henderson game plan against Tennessee. Because Travion's also the guy, Trev, that can get out of the pocket. He can get outside and make plays. Doesn't have to do it between the trenches in an area where we all agree. Do we all agree Ohio State's front offensive line is likely going to get whipped in this game? I mean, that's why we all have Ohio State scoring between 17 and 24 points, right?
Right.
It's going to have to be the playmakers on the perimeter, and I think Travion is part of that. I think that's a big part of that. That's the only way they can neutralize that Tennessee front four. Because if this is a traditional Ohio State game plan, drop back, sit in the pocket type of thing, I think they're going to get eaten up a little bit. For me, I look at Tennessee and I see that they struggled to move the ball and score points since October started. Yeah. And I just don't know that that's going to change in this game. That's what's going to be interesting. Is Nico going to be able to make some of those plays? Would you say, guys, this is the game where I have the least faith in both quarterbacks? I think Nico can eventually be great. I just think right now. I think Texas' Clemson is probably next.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's like Notre Dame, Indiana is probably the game where I have the most faith in the two quarterbacks unless they're just overwhelmed by a defense. I think Drew Aller has been a much better quarterback than people give him credit for this year. I think Kevin Jennings has been a dude. We talked about the Texas-Clemson game. This is the one game where I'm just like, I don't have faith in either one of these quarterbacks, to be completely honest with you. I do think Nico is eventually going to get there. He's just young. Will Howard's a fifth-year guy. This is kind of who he is.
Right.
This is why Oregon was like, or Kansas State was like, no, we're good. We'll go with Avery Johnson. Bass, we're good. Go to Ohio State. You know what I mean? And this is why Ohio State went after Cam Ward first. That's why they went after Riley Leonard first and then settled on Will Howard, because I just don't think he's that championship caliber quarterback. And I think that hurts them, especially when their offensive line is struggling. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. So